There's nothing like the aroma of fresh baked bread. And with your Black & Decker all-in-one horizontal bread maker, you can have the old-fashioned goodness of homemade bread with today's electronic convenience. Because your horizontal bread maker does the work automatically. Even if you've never made homemade bread before, you'll rise to the occasion as the mixing, kneading, and baking is all done for you. It's very simple, and it's all detailed in the handy instruction manual and recipe book. Start by taking the baking pan out of the bread maker. Just pull straight up and out. You'll want to add the ingredients to the pan when it's outside the unit to avoid spilling anything into the oven chamber. Insert the mixing paddle by lining up the flat side of the paddle with the flat side of the shaft in the baking pan. Like this. We're ready to start. I'm going to show you how to make a large loaf of white bread. It's a basic, popular bread, and the recipe is included in the cookbook section of your manual. Your bread maker can make large loaves, ranging in size from 1.5 to 2 pounds. Flour differs from one country to the next. Because there's more flour than any other ingredient in your bread, you'll want to be sure to use the right kind. In Canada, you may use all-purpose flour or bread flour, but in the US, you must use only bread flour. There's a reminder about flour types on every page of the recipe section. Using the right ingredients, measuring them accurately, and adding them to the pan in the order listed is essential to making a successful bread in an automatic bread maker. For my large white bread, I'll use 1 1/3 cups of lukewarm water. Temperature is important. If the water is too cold, it won't activate the yeast. If it's too hot, it'll kill the yeast. Use a clear liquid measuring cup to measure water or fresh milk so you can check the measure at eye level. Too much or too little liquid will affect your bread. That's a bit too much. Perfect. Now I'll add the other ingredients using standard measuring spoons. I'll start with 2 tablespoons of powdered milk. Level off each ingredient with the straight edge of a knife. Next, 2 tablespoons of butter, or if you prefer, margarine. And finally, a tablespoon of sugar and 1.5 teaspoons of salt, which I've also leveled off. Measure 3 3/4 cups flour and make sure you use the appropriate size dry measuring cup for each measure. Then scoop the flour into the cup and level it off. We've developed all our recipes using national brands of flour. In Canada, we found that most all-purpose brands of flour work well in your unit, but in the US, you must use bread flour. American all-purpose flour won't give you good results. Also, never use fast-rising pastry or cake flour in recipes in either country. Always add yeast last, and be sure it doesn't touch liquid ingredients, especially if you're using the delayed cycle. The liquid could activate the yeast too soon. We tested our recipes using active dry yeast, but you may use bread machine yeast with good results. Be sure to store yeast according to the manufacturer's instructions once it's opened. Also, always check the expiry date. And now, let's have the all-in-one horizontal bread maker do the rest of the work for us. Insert the baking pan into the oven chamber and press down. When you plug in your bread maker, you'll see these 2 arrows in the display window, automatically set for basic bread and a regular crust. You'll also see 12 a.m. flashing on the digital clock. You don't have to set the clock if you want to bake your bread right away. Just select the appropriate setting and push the Start Reset button. On the control panel, you'll see 4 bread settings, a dough, a bake, and a crust selection setting for regular or dark crust. If you have the deluxe model, there are additional settings for French, cake, jam, and desserts. Check your use and care manual for instructions and recipes for these settings. The basic setting is for breads with white flour as the main ingredient. Press Menu to move the arrow to other selections. The Rapid Bake setting will produce bread in just under 2 hours. Great when you want to have bread ready in time for last-minute dinner guests. Check your recipe book to see which recipes work on the Rapid Bake cycle. The Sweet setting is for breads with large amounts of sugar or other ingredients sensitive to higher temperatures like cheese or chocolate. All the settings except Rapid have an Add Ingredient signal that sounds like this and tells you when to add ingredients like nuts or raisins. You can add these mix-ins before adding yeast when you first prepare your bread, but sometimes they get chopped up by the paddle. If you wait for the add ingredient signal to put in raisins or nuts, the mix-ins will more likely stay whole. Grain is for recipes with larger quantities of whole wheat or rye flour, oats, or bran. It's the longest program because the heavy, dense flours need more rising time than white flour. The dough setting lets you make dough that you'll then shape and bake in a traditional oven. You can make pizza crust, French bread, rolls, focaccia, pretzels, and lots of other delicious recipes. The last setting is bake, and it basically lets you use your Breadmaker as an oven. Check out the cookbook for recipes like banana nut quick bread and caramel monkey bread. You can experiment with non-yeast bread recipes of your own by lowering the temperature and lengthening the bake time. The crust control function only works on the basic, rapid, or sweet settings. Heavy grain breads tend to be naturally darker in color, so crust color doesn't apply to the grain setting, nor the dough or bake settings. When choosing a crust, be sure you've selected basic, rapid, or sweet bread. Then press the crust color pad to select regular or dark. Now, if you decide you don't want your bread right away, you can use the timer to delay your gratification. It lets you hold off completing your bread for up to 13 hours. To use the timer, you first have to set the clock. Press the clock button. When the hour starts flashing, hold the up or down arrow to set the current hour. Watch for AM or PM in the display. Once you've set the correct hour, press clock again to get the minutes flashing. Use the up or down arrows to set the minutes. When the flashing stops, the clock is set. Now you can set the timer in a similar way. Let's say you want to wake up to the delicious aroma of fresh baked bread at 7:30 a.m. Press and hold the timer button until timer appears in the display and the hour flashes. While the hour flashes, use the arrows to set the hour to 7. Watch for the AM in the display. Press timer while the hour is flashing and set your minutes to 30. When the 30 stops flashing, your timer is set. To activate the timer, press timer for a second. Your preset time will flash, and then the actual time will come up on the display. The green timer light will come on. No need to press the start button. If the green light doesn't come on, you get an error or 0 hour on the display. Check your manual for help. It means you either set the timer for a period shorter than the setting you've picked or for a time longer than the maximum 13 hours. The timer will automatically count down. When it reaches the time for the bread setting you've selected, say 350 for our basic setting, the green timer light will go out and the red operation light will come on. Check how much time is left once the red light is on. Simply look at the countdown time in the display. Remember, you can't use the timer on the rapid bake setting, and never use it with recipes that call for perishable ingredients like fresh milk, cheese, or eggs, because they could spoil. Your bread maker may vibrate during the mixing and kneading, so be sure it's set up on a stable, flat surface. Also check that it doesn't touch the wall and is in an area that's well ventilated. Never cover your unit or put an object on top of it during operation, because some steam could escape during baking and the unit could overheat. If you want to peek in on the action, look through this viewing window. If it has condensation, it'll go away during baking and you'll get a clear view. But resist the temptation to open the lid during the baking cycle, because it may affect baking results. Since everything is automatic, chances are you'll earn bragging rights with your very first loaf. But nobody's perfect. Sometimes even when you think you've done everything right, you end up with a bread that's too tall, lopsided, or caved in. Or you may have a loaf that's darker than you expected. What's acceptable in height or color is a matter of personal taste. Breads like rye, whole wheat, or pumpernickel tend to be shorter, darker loaves by their nature, or may be lopsided. But just in case you encounter a bread that just doesn't cut it, we've included a troubleshooting guide that will help you figure out if you put in too much salt, too little milk, or forgot to add the yeast. While we're waiting for our bread to bake, let's take a look at some problem loaves. If your bread looks cratered with the top or sides caved in like this one, you may have used too much liquid or forgotten the salt. Short, dense bread like this might mean you measured yeast or salt wrong. Remember, these two ingredients are always measured in teaspoons, not tablespoons. Which brings us to this over-risen mushroom-shaped loaf. If this happens, you went too heavy on the yeast or sugar. Have you ever had a bread come out looking like a brick? It means you forgot the yeast or used some old expired yeast. Remember to check the date. Whatever the problem, the tips, troubleshooting guide, or need help question and answer section of the book ought to help you solve the mystery. Oh, great. That's the signal that our bread is ready. I'm going to take my bread out right away, but if you were away from your kitchen and didn't hear the signal, don't worry. Your Breadmaker has a keep warm function that will keep it moist and warm in the unit for up to an hour. This blinking red light tells you that the keep warm function is operating. It will stop blinking after an hour, but the red light will stay on until you unplug or push the reset on your Breadmaker. Okay, we're ready to take out our bread. Always wear oven mitts or use pot holders to handle the pan after baking because the bread pan's very hot. Grasp the handle and pull the pan straight up and out. To remove the bread, turn the pan upside down and shake the bread out onto a cooling rack. Always check to see where the mixing paddle is, in the baking pan or in the bread, because you could damage the paddle if you cut into it. The paddle has a non-stick coating and may stay in the bread. If it does, let the bread cool, then remove the paddle with a plastic or rubber utensil. A sharp utensil could damage the non-stick coating. If the paddle stays in the pan, add hot water and let it soak so it's easy to remove. Oh, that smells delicious. And you'll probably want a piece right away, but you'll have to let your bread cool for about 15 to 20 minutes so you can slice it easily. You'll know if your bread hasn't cooled enough if it mashes down when you try to cut it manually. Once the bread is cooled, you can easily get even slices with an electric knife like this one that has an adjustable guide for thick or thin slices. And now for the best part of baking your own bread. And this is only the beginning, because there are more than 24 recipes in the cookbook, including everything from focaccia and raisin cinnamon bread to dinner rolls, pumpernickel bread, and cake-style quick breads. Try our recipes and then experiment with a few of your own. Use the manual for care and cleaning instructions, popular recipes, and troubleshooting. And if you have any other questions, call 1-800-231-9786 in the US, or in Canada, call 1-800-465-6070.